Hi, Nick Rains from Leica Camera Australia here. This video is all about the Leica M11 menus and the options that I personally choose when I'm using the camera. I'm not going to show you any images from the camera. I'm not going to talk about anything else. It's just specifically about how I set the camera up and about the choices I make in the menus. So let's get started. Turn the camera on and hit the menu button. So far so good, and we'll see this familiar outlook here. Now this is common across many Leica cameras. You've got the 12 different quick options here, and then this shows you what the camera is set to. For instance, A, aperture priority mode, because I have A set on the top here. This is the exposure, this is the ISO I've chosen, no exposure compensation set. Then down the bottom we've got these 12 options here. This is to turn on and off live view. Then we've got the drive mode. Then we've got the metering mode, multi-field is what I'm choosing here. Then now this is a little bit different. I've got this set to K value because I'm shooting in the studio here, and I wanted the view in here to look reasonably white. Otherwise it would look a very strange orange or blue color. So I've set a Kelvin value here to 4,600 specifically because I'm in my studio. Normally you would be much more likely to change that to something like daylight. Something like that. In fact, if I leave that now and go back to the live view, you'll see how that's gone a little bit warmer. It's not too far off actually, so let me leave it like that. Back to the menu. Then we have the different camera profiles that you may have saved, so your different setups. We have DNG or JPEG. You can shoot DNG, JPEG, and DNG or JPEG. Then, so when you go to JPEG, of course, it grays out the next one because that's the size of the DNG file. So let me go back to DNG there, and then I can now choose my large, medium, or small DNG file, depending on how much resolution I want. Then if I was shooting JPEGs, I would have JPEG options here. So if I change that to JPEG plus DNG, both of those will be available to me. If I hit the JPEG one, it gives me small, medium, large JPEG. So pretty obvious really. This is for formatting your card, Wi-Fi settings, and then that one takes you straight to the menus. Now you can either tap there or you can simply tap the menu item here, or menu button I should say. So normally if I want to skip that, I'll press the menu button twice, and this takes me into the main menu section. So I'm going to go through all these options down the page, and there's 5 pages of them as you can see across the top. So lens detection, I would leave on auto. That means that the camera knows or can detect what lens you have fitted, just in case that you have something other than an M series lens, because you can adapt other lenses to it. Drive mode, let me just go down to that option. And then we have all sorts of options here. I tend to shoot on single, but you can shoot low, high speed, self-timer 2 seconds, self-timer 12 seconds. You can shoot intervals for time lapses, and you can shoot exposure bracketing, which I do use quite a bit. And if you see this little arrow here, that means that there's more options by clicking the right hand arrow on the dial here. So if I click that, this now takes into exposure bracketing, number of frames in the sequence, 5, EV steps between them. Now I'm going to change the top one to 3. Oops, I'll just go back and do that again. There. So if I rock it backwards, exposure bracketing, click there, and then I can go up and down to choose those options. If I hit the set button, I can toggle between 3 and 5, and you'll see 5 little arrows at the bottom showing me where those exposures sit relative to the camera's best guess, which is in the middle. I tend to choose 3, and I tend to choose EV steps of 2. So you get 0, -2, and +2 as your 3 exposures. You can also set an exposure compensation by shifting up the entire range from, let's say now it's 0, +2, and +4, but you can also do that at the time of shooting using the normal exposure compensation dial. So I tend to leave that on 0. Now be careful that you remember to that you've set this, because if I come out of the menus now, you'll see in the quick menu this little symbol here, which is showing me that I have exposure bracketing set. Now, every time I press the shutter button now, we're going to get 3 shots. So just be aware and keep an eye on that. And I'm going to put that back to single shot like that. There we go. It should come back to the menu. There we go. Okay. All right, back to the main menu then. Exposure metering. We have some options. I tend to leave it on multi-field. The other options are valuable. I would suggest that you try them and see how they work for you. Personally, I find multi-field pretty much unbeatable, but because I tend to expose using the histogram and the exposure highlight warning, I don't really care what the metering does. I don't actually rely on the metering of the camera directly. I rely on the histogram and the exposure warning for the highlights. So I'm basically pegging my highlights. So come back to the menu again. Exposure compensation we've talked about. M ISO, this is when you have the ISO dial, which is here, set to M, and then you choose the ISO in here. And this allows you to go to the much higher settings, right the way up to 50,000. The dial on here is only limited in the number of settings that you can use. There's only so much space on the dial. If you want to go above or below, if you want to go above that, you have to go to M ISO. Auto ISO settings, very important. So little arrow, right arrow here, click into those. Maximum ISO that you will allow the camera to use. I've got it set on 25,000. There's probably a reasonable case for shifting it onto 50,000, which is the maximum it can be. The reason I say that is because I would rather have a noisy image that's sharp than a not so noisy image which is a little bit blurry due to using too low a shutter speed. So I tend to prioritize shutter speed over the actual noise of the image with the ISO. The shutter speed limit, this is the lowest shutter speed that the camera will drop to before the ISO starts going up. So it's like a threshold. And I've got this set on 1 divided by 4 times the focal length, which means that if I'm using a 50mm lens, that would be set to a 200 minimum, 50 times 4, before the ISO starts going up. So my shutter speed will not drop below 200 ISO until as the light drops, and then the ISO will go up from there. So I will never get a shutter speed of less than 200. I do that because it's a very, very high resolution sensor, and I want all of the sharpness that I can get due to the shutter speed. I don't want to risk camera shake. Maximum ISO for flash, I don't use flash, so let's not worry about that. Same with the next one. And then this is the scale of ISO that it will work through, which is full. So very, very useful auto ISO, and that's how you set it. Next page, on to page number 2. White balance, you can set that here, or you can set that in the main menu or the quick menu. File format, again accessible through the quick menu, same with DNG resolution, same with JPEG settings. Auto review, I think this is by default set to 3 seconds. I turn it off. I do not want to see my image just as soon as I've shot it. If I use the electronic viewfinder on the top, the image will preview right in front of my eye. I might want to take another picture. I don't want to do that. So I will either turn it off, or sometimes I'll have shutter button pressed. So that means that when you squeeze the shutter button and hold it down, you will see a preview of the shot that you just took until you release your finger. That might suit some people. Personally, I turn that off. Noise reduction. This is long exposure noise reduction. When you go to an exposure of longer than 1 second, the camera will do a second exposure for the same amount of time, and it will subtract the noise of that black exposure from the original shot and give you a slightly lower noisy result. But you have to wait that extra time. So if you're doing a 1 minute exposure, you will need to wait another minute, which might not be convenient. So you can turn that off here and then do post-processing work to reduce the noise yourself later if you want to. Page number 3, shutter type, hybrid. We have an electronic shutter available in the M. We can have fully mechanical, which limits it to a higher shutter speed of 4,000th of a second. We can go electronic, which allows it to go much higher to a 16,000th of a second. And we can have hybrid, which means it's mechanical up to 4,000 and then electronic past that point. I leave it on hybrid. Flash settings, again, we're not talking about flash. Digital zoom, you can change to 1.3 or 1.8 times crop for JPEGs. It's only a metadata crop for RAW files, so you will see the RAW file kind of cropped in Lightroom when you look at it, but in actual fact you can uncrop it simply by cancelling the crop tool in Lightroom. So I tend to leave that off. It's not something that I use very often. Perspective correction, you can turn that on or off. This allows you to correct for perspective as you tilt the camera up or down. I have another video about that which you can look at from a few months ago. I'll link that in the description below. Storage options, interesting. You do have a whole bunch of different ways that you can combine the memory card, which sits in with the battery case, and with the internal memory, because it has 64 gigabytes of internal memory, which is quite a lot, and you can set the sequence of events. So in this particular case, it's DNG and JPEG first on SD, which means everything goes on the SD card until it gets full, then it goes internal. But for instance, you can have another option, which is on the next, where's the next one? That's on, there we go. DNG on internal, JPEG on SD, or DNG on SD card and JPEG on internal. So that means your DNG files go on your SD card and your JPEGs go on the internal memory. You can use that how you like. Customize control. Edit favorites. Now, here's a little thing. If you have no favorites set, and I'll talk about that in a sec, you will only ever see one menu here when you press the menu button. If I press the menu button again, I go straight into the main menus. Now, if I have customized control and favorites set, I get another screen between the two. Let me just show you. Now, these are all set to off. These are all menu items, which is what we've been going through. So let's turn lens detection on. Now it's on. It's the only one that's on. So I'm going to come out of the menus. Now, when I press menu now, and I get the quick menu, then again, I get another screen. It says favorites, and lens detection is the only one that's showing up. So you can fill up this screen with whatever options that you want, which might be things that you use frequently. I tend not to do that because I have the camera set up in a certain way and I leave it alone, but that is how you can get it like a quick mini menu before you get to the main menus. So I just go back to the edit favorites and turn that one back off again. And then when I come out and hit the menu button again, you'll see I go straight to the main menu. Okay. Incidentally, those are the lines of the perspective control, which I turned on, and I'm now going to go back and turn off again. Oops. There. Turn that off. And now when I come back to the live view, they're not there anymore. All right. Storage options, customize control, more customized control. You can reset favorites. You can customize the wheel, which is here. And I have that set to exposure compensation, but you can change that to no function, exposure compensation, or focus aid. But you can also, and this isn't at all obvious, you can change this wheel to a custom function wheel, or custom function button, I should say, as well as the custom function button on the top where my finger is here, and also the FN button here for function. I'll come back to those in a sec. All right, customize control. And there's some LEDs which you can turn on or off there, which I just leave those on. Okay, page 4, capture assistance. This is where you can set up 4 different views on the back of the camera that you toggle through using the info button. So I've got 4 different views. There's different information, no information, some information, and then there's actually 4 views. I've only probably got 2 set. So let me come back into the menu, come back to capture assistance, info profiles, click the right button, and you see there's only one. I've got info profile number 1 turned on, there's 2, 3, and 4 turned off, and if I click my right arrow again, I can choose what is shown in that screen layout. Info bars on, grids off, clipping off, focus peaking is on, level gauge is off. So if I go back to the menu, capture assistance, info profiles number 2, turn that on. Info bars, I'm going to put grids on. I'm going to turn the level gauge on, and I'm going to go back to the menu and back out again. And then when I cycle through that, look, there's another view with the level set. And here's a view without the level set, and here's a view with all the information, but not the level set. So you can customize your camera to a great degree and have 4 different views in the live view on the back of the camera, and also, of course, in the electronic viewfinder on the top. Very, very useful indeed. Exposure preview I leave on permanent. That means that the exposure I've set in the camera is going to be reflected in the view I see on the back of the camera and in the electronic viewfinder. If you turn that off, you always see what looks like a correct exposure in the back, even though the final exposure might not be what you expect. So I leave that on so that I'm getting a preview of the actual exposure. So if it's underexposed, it'll look too dark, and if it's overexposed, it'll look too light. It's a good clue as to what you're doing. Focus aid, that is on automatic. That means that when I move the focusing ring around the actual lens itself, it will magnify to give me my critical focusing. You can do that manually, but having it on automatic is just so much easier. Okay, you can save all of your menu settings as user profiles. So if you have different functions that you want to use the camera for, or different users of the camera who use the camera a different way, you can save profiles. It also means that if you save your camera as a single profile and then you upgrade the firmware, you can save that profile and then reload it once the firmware has been updated, so that you don't have to go back and set all these settings again. So it's a nice little way of saving the state of the camera. Display settings, I don't really play with this very much. I do leave the LCD brightness on default, which is 0. You can make it brighter or darker, and you can move the little marker around and make it look how you want. I tend to leave that alone. It seems fine where it is. I'm not judging the exposure by the back of the screen anyway, so it's no big deal. Then we've got sensitivities. You can leave that all on automatic. I don't play with that. Leica Photos, this is when you attach it to the Photos app on your phone. That's subject of another video. Storage management, oops, let me come back to there. So backup memory, this means that when the SD card is full, it will go immediately to the internal. And of course, you've got the option to format the storage there. Camera settings, power saving mode, 2 minutes I've got mine set to, and the display on 30 seconds. They're fairly obvious what those do. You can set those to what suits you. The longer the standby is set to, obviously the less the battery will last, so I tend to leave it on. I've got it on 2 minutes, which is quite long. That's mostly because I'm doing these demonstrations and I don't really want the camera to turn itself off. You may have noticed the screen has turned off a couple of times in this video. That's because, I come back to there, power saving mode, display standby is set to 30 seconds, so I'm going to make that a minute and it won't do it again. All right, camera settings, USB charging is on because you can charge through the USB port down here. Actually, it's down there, so I'm looking at the wrong spot. You can see it very easily. Rest of that I can leave alone. What have we got else? We got, so do that. Then camera informations, language, and then reset camera, which puts it back to default, all of the settings as it came from the factory. Now, I did mention the custom buttons before. These are very cool because it means that you can bypass the menus completely and you can set a function for the FN button, the wheel, and the custom button on the top to give you quick access to a menu item without having to go into the menu. For instance, if I click and hold the FN button here, holding it down, now I get all of the menu items that we've just been through, and it gives me quick access to all of those. Now, I don't know how you want to set yours. I think I'm going to put my perspective correction on that one. So if I now hit FN short click, my perspective correction's on and off. That's really neat. Hold down the wheel, same thing. I've got it set to exposure compensation, but I could have access to other functions too. And then the one on the top up here, hold that one down, and I've got that set to drive mode. So I can change from single shot to, let's say, self timer quite quickly. So now if I just click that button quickly, I now get my drive mode option. And then I can just tap the shutter button to come out of that mode. So that allows you to customize the camera beyond just the quick function menus here. So it's even quicker than using this. It gives you direct access into the menus, but for 3 things that you might need occasionally, or more occasionally, more frequently, should I say, than diving into the menus themselves. So that's how I've got the camera set up, using Leica's own motto of Das Wesentliche, that is the essentials. There is nothing more to set up with this camera. It's extremely simple. Once I've got the camera set as I've just described, that is literally how I use the camera. Very straightforward. You don't have to overthink it. So I hope that was useful. There's nowhere near as many menu items as a lot of cameras out there, but that's because you don't really need a lot of them. I much prefer to have the basics done well, and these menus are some of the best on the market for usability.